Hello and welcome to Just Ride Bikes. I'm David, and in today's video we're talking about mountain bikes versus gravel bikes. Which is better and which is right for you, and what are the differences between the two types of bikes. And the reason for doing this video is because there's a really relevant debate right now. And every time I review a gravel bike like this, there are loads of comments of people saying, just buy a mountain bike already. So I thought I'd do some comparison testing between these two bikes on a range of trails, and devise a small route with a road climb, a gravel section and a single track descent to see what differences there are between the two bikes. And while at time testing, we'll reveal which of these bikes is fastest on different terrains and surfaces and will be an important consideration for many people watching this video. I think there are more subtle differences between these two bikes than just the speed. It's about the ride experience, the attitude you bring to the riding, the sort of riding they offer you, whether it's mountain biking or bike packing adventure riding. And we'll get into that in this video. Before we go riding, let's dive into each bike, give you an idea of what to expect, and then we'll go and do some time testing. Let's start with a gravel bike we're using for today's video. And this is a fairly good example of a state-of-the-art gravel bike. Now, drop bar bikes, road and gravel like this, have already borrowed lots from mountain bike, disc brakes, wide tube tyres and much more. But this bike takes that to the next level with a RockShox Rudy suspension fork up front and a RockShox Reverb dropper seat post on the back. So really pushing the boundaries of what a gravel bike is and can be. All these parts are bolted to a Salsa Warbird carbon fibre frame with massive tyre clearance, 40mm Zip G40 tyres on these new Zip 101 Explorer wheels, and we have a 1x drivetrain with a new 1044 cassette with wireless gear shifting. And this bike, more than most, really divides opinion in the cycling sector, because for many people it's straying too far away from the purity and simplicity of a gravel bike, but for many people it's borrowing just enough technology from a mountain bike to increase the capability and the versatility of a gravel bike without ruining that speed and efficiency that a gravel bike offers. So that's a gravel bike. Let's have a look at a mountain bike. And this is a mountain bike I'll be using, a brand new 2022 Scott Spark full suspension 29er carbon fibre mountain bike. And some of you might be asking and wondering why I'm not using a hardtail mountain bike. Would that be a fairer comparison to the gravel bike? And it might be, but in my personal experience, I would always choose, if I had the option, a full suspension mountain bike over a hardtail mountain bike. If you go mountain biking, a full suspension bike is faster, smoother and much more capable in my experience, but I know there are many fans of hardtails, especially here in the UK. So with that out of the way, let's dive into this bike in a bit more detail. And like I said, it's a brand new bike that builds on a long pedigree of Olympic and World Cup success. And we now have the rear shock hidden inside the carbon fibre frame. So very sleek lines, keeps the rear shock out of mud and gives it a very modern appearance. And that rear shock delivers 120mm of rear suspension travel, which you can lock out and control from the handlebar lever. Got 3 modes available there. And that's matched up front by a RockShox SID suspension fork, delivering 120mm of travel, which is a whopping 90mm more than the RockShox Rudy on the gravel bike I showed you just now. And this bike, as is the way with most of the modern cross-country race bikes being developed now, has a dropper post as well, delivering more travel than the shorter one on the gravel bike over there. And then we have 29-inch wheels. We have 12-speed wire shifting with a whopping 1052 cassette on the back and a 1x chainring on the front. And on this bike, a one-piece carbon handlebar and stem with most of the cables and hoses routed inside the head tube of the frame. So that is an influence from the drop bar world over into the mountain bike. But mountain bikes are generally given more to gravel and road bikes than they've taken from drop bar bikes. Right, we're in the woods, going to do a bit of riding, and just a quick overview of the route I have planned today. So it starts with a techie downhill section, quite steep in places and lots of roots and quite loose at the moment. And then a gravel section, undulating, not too steep in places and sandy and a bit of gravel here and there. And then a smooth tarmac road climb to finish. So quite short, not super long, but a bit of everything for each bike to hopefully shine in its respective area. So let's see how we get on. Wait, hang on. You want me to ride down there? You gotta be joking me, right? Look how steep it is. I couldn't hardly see the bottom. Down there? No way, no, that's way too steep. This highlights the drawback with a gravel bike, as good as this one is that when you're on very steep tracks, when you're in the drops or even on the hoods, your weighted pitch alarmingly over the front. So it feels pretty scary. That's the main benefit of a mountain bike, much higher at the front, so your weight isn't pitched over the front as alarmingly as it is on a gravel bike. This sort of trail, while not super technical for many of you, it's a black on a gravel bike and probably blue on a mountain bike. So big difference in riding approach with these two bikes. But let's crack on and see how we get on with the rest of the trail. This is more what a gravel bike is designed for. A gravel track in the woods. Bit sandy, bit rocky. And straight away the bike feels much quicker right at home here, which is no surprise really. And onto the final road section. This is where the bike should shine. I engage the lockout and the fork. Almost at the top now, final push. Okay, dropping in on the Scott Spark mountain bike and see how it compares to the time set down by the gravel bike just now. And already it feels much more capable on the steep stuff. Just so much more at home on this. Whereas the mountain bike just makes light work of it all. So the mountain bike made mincemeat of that steep techie section where I struggled on a gravel bike, and now onto the gravel section. So I got a fully open suspension, climbing traction mode, and then full lockout. And I've now engaged that middle of the three modes. The downside with a mountain bike on a gravel track like this is you have one handlebar position, and it's very wide, as you can see. Whereas on the drop bar you get three positions ultimately. And now we're on the road, going to push the twin lock into lockout. So I'm fully locked out now, but it doesn't feel as quick. That's a gravel bike. With the suspension locked out, I feel a big tire bouncing. You can hear the tire dragging. The position not as aggressive, not as, I've only got one handlebar position. I don't feel I can push on as hard or as fast as a gravel bike. Whew. It's hurting now. Final push for the line. Right, okay, time to check the times. And after riding the same route on both bikes, the times are quite interesting, but perhaps not that surprising to you if you have ridden gravel and mountain bikes. So on the steep techie trail, the mountain bike was way faster than a gravel bike. And that's partly because there were some quite steep bits on that trail that were almost unrideable, at least for me, on the gravel bike, whereas this bike just sailed down through them with no problems at all. And that comparison really highlights the difference between a mountain bike and a gravel bike. So when people say a gravel bike, it's just a mountain bike with a drop bar, well, that's not true. A gravel bike, as good as that Salsa is with a suspension fork and a dropper post, it's clearly not as capable on very steep technical trails as this mountain bike here, which is no surprise given that this bike is designed for that sort of riding. So it's 1-0 to the mountain bike. Onto the gravel section, and here things got a lot closer and quite interesting really, but the gravel bike at the end of this section drew away from the mountain bike. And while the mountain bike was still fast on that gravel section, the more aggressive riding position of the gravel bike, coupled to the options with the riding positions on the hoods, the drops and the tops, made that bike feel faster and ultimately faster against the clock than this bike here. But the differences were quite small, it has to be said. So at the end of the gravel section, it's 1-1. And then onto the final road climb. And well, here the gravel bike, as you might expect, drew ahead by a big margin. Simply put, it's much faster and easier to ride faster up that road climb than the mountain bike. The mountain bike wasn't slow, lightweight in this build, got the lockouts for the front and rear suspension and big 29er wheels, but a gravel bike was easy to ride fast. Lighter overall weight, faster rolling, narrower tyres, and a more aggressive riding position. You're more angled over the bike, better hip angle for getting the power out, and you ride on the hoods or drops, and more aero, and just a faster all-round package than this bike here. So at the end of the 3 sections, it's 2-1 to the gravel bike. But this conversation, this debate is much wider than just which is faster, because the results of your time testing, if you repeat this time testing where you live, might be very, very different. It depends on what terrain you're riding and what terrain you want to ride on your mountain bike versus your gravel bike. This was trying to highlight the extreme differences of each bike on terrain where they should ultimately excel. For riding a wide variety of trails, from tarmac to smooth dirt and gravel and some occasional rocky boulders and single track, the gravel bike is a really compelling option. It covers ground extremely quickly and it's a super versatile bike. When you're riding routes where you have to link together off-road trails with road sections, this is a faster setup. While the suspension fork and the dropper seat post give you a bit more capability when you find some mountain bike style trails. But if you're just riding off-road trails with big roots and rocks and other features, then that bike can quickly get out of its depth. And that is where a mountain bike really excels. This bike naturally is more at home on off-road trails, here in the woods, with rocks and roots and other features, man-made or natural, where the suspension, the geometry, the wide handlebars give you much more control and much more capability and put a bigger smile on your face. But if you try and ride this bike in the same way you can a gravel bike, i.e. linking together off-road trails, smooth gravel and road, well, it's not as much fun. And that lack of adaptability to different terrains is really the Achilles heel of a mountain bike. I mean, this bike isn't designed to be good on the road, smooth gravel, designed for mountain biking. That's why it's called a mountain bike, even though we don't have mountains where I live, we have hills. But let's get away from that debate around what it's called. And this bike also isn't as versatile. I mean, you wouldn't use it for commuting to work, you wouldn't use it for a Sunday club run, you won't put slick tyres in for road riding. Well, you can do all that with that. So that bike is many bikes in one, whereas this really is one bike for off-road terrain. So which is better is really an impossible question to answer, because it comes down to what you want from your bike. If you're a mountain biker, well, clearly this will be a better option for you than that bike. But if you're a mountain biker and you want a fast commuting bike for riding tamer trails where mountain bike is overkill, then that is a really exciting option. But if you're a roadie coming to off-road, then this is very intimidating with all the technology and wheel size shenanigans and loads of other stuff to worry about. Whereas this looks essentially like your road bike with knobby tyres and a few other changes. So it's an easier transition to make and gets you riding off-road on trails that you're more comfortable riding, gravel and dirt, and steering clear from the quite challenging terrain that this bike is very capable for riding. And we mustn't forget the other reasons bikes like this one are really popular right now. There's a whole adventure bike packing scene which is capturing people's imagination for riding multi-day routes with bike packing luggage, which these bikes are extremely well suited to, much better in many cases than these, unless you're riding terrain where this bike would give you a performance benefit. But for most people, this bike is more than adequate. And then there's a whole versatility I've already mentioned. This bike with 2 sets of wheels, chunky tyres for off-road, slick tyres for riding on the road, gives you essentially 2 bikes in one. A road bike, a commuter bike, and then your off-road bike. These are both amazing bikes, both amazing at what they do. And while they do kind of come together pretty close in some areas, there's still enough difference in my mind and my riding experience of these 2 bikes to keep them very separate. So there we go, gravel versus mountain bike. They're both bloody awesome bikes. I love them both as much as each other for the differences as much as their similarities. Anyway, that's all for now. Hopefully you found this video useful and interesting. And as always, if you've got any questions, put them down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy watching the video. And you'll see another bike comparing gravel to mountain bike I did previously. Then check on the video up here. And you'll see 10 of the best gravel bikes you can buy right now. Check this video up here. Right, that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all again very soon.